Hello, everyone. I'm here with Ryan Cooper, who is the national correspondent at The Week. He recently wrote a piece called How Democrats Learned to Stop Worrying and Hand Out Fat Sacks of Cash, which I love. Ryan is one of the best. He always has his finger on the pulse of everything from a progressive perspective, in my view. So definitely check out his work at The Week. How are you today, Ryan?
I'm doing pretty well. Sorry, that was my cat right there.
Oh, well, look, love cats, love dogs, and we're all working through some difficulties. You're working through feline difficulties. I just had about 20, 30 minutes of technical difficulties. People who watch or listen to this program know Sam usually will yell in those instances or get visibly frustrated. I just internalize it and get quite anxious. So thanks for working through that with me, Ryan.
My pleasure. It's happened to us all.
Yes, as such is the time. So I want to get into your piece because I've been fascinated by the contrast between the response to the economic collapse in obviously 2008, but then 2009 when Obama took office and Democrats controlled the House and the Senate with a much wider margin than they do right now. And the fact that trillion was a dirty word, basically, in terms of stimulus. And there was all the talk about how we can't go too big. Larry Summers was in the picture. You can't go over this number. And it kept getting whittled down, even though Democrats ostensibly had more power. Now, Democrats have the thinnest margin possible in the Senate, 50-50, with Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker, and an even smaller margin in the House. And this stimulus package, a lot of us are focused on what isn't in it, which is the $15 minimum wage, which is extremely important. But there's a lot of great stuff in it. So I wanted to, one, have you address that contrast, and two, talk about what your thoughts are about what the American Rescue Package contains.
Yeah, so Obama's new book that just came out a couple of months ago is kind of interesting on this question because, yeah, as you say, they had a huge majority in the Senate and a huge majority in the House. And, historic Black president who is taking power. Let's not forget also that George W. Bush, was leaving office with like 22% approval rating. I mean, he was just despised. There was massive, momentum to do something. And yet, in the key discussion in the White House, he writes about this, where they're talking about the size of the stimulus. Rahm Emanuel, according to Obama at least, Rahm Emanuel says you'll never get, this more than 700 billion, some number. You'll never get more than a trillion. And then Obama turns to Biden, and Biden says, "Yeah, probably not." And then they're like, "That's it." They don't even try to make the stimulus as big as their own economists think it should be. And this is already after a negotiation internally within the economics team, where basically Larry Summers had buffaloed Christy Romer into cutting her estimate from 1.8 trillion to 1.2 trillion for inexplicable reasons. And so, they basically were sitting on their own hands, and pretending that they couldn't, do much of anything. And in fact, over and above that, there are a lot of clever tricks you could have used to increase the effectiveness of the stimulus without increasing the dollar amount. They're complicated. Don't need to go into them, but like the administration rejected all of them out of hand. And so now I think what's happened is they're making the opposite political calculation. They hemmed themselves in politically by thinking that we're going to we're going to pay a price with the voters if we blow the deficit up. Like all the serious reporters in Washington D.C. are going to be on our case if we are super aggressive, whatever. Now we're coming off a decade in which the deficit has exploded, and yet the borrowing costs as a percentage of GDP are basically still at historic lows. Obama did all this austerity and cut the budget deficit. Now Trump's come into office. After Trump came into office, what did he do? He cut taxes on the rich and gave it all to them. All that hard work, in this form of high unemployment for an entire presidency, basically, it was completely pointless. And I think that even the moderate Democrats are thinking like, what are we doing with this nonsense about, negotiating with ourselves? You still see embers of it, as you said, in the bill, when they sort of nipped away at it. But like fundamentally, the overall headline package is 1.9 trillion, more than twice as big in dollar amounts, and coming on top of an economy that is a lot stronger than it was in 2009. So it could be a real boom. I'm fingers crossed, to get rid of the pandemic in the second half of this year. So what's in this thing? You've got $1,400 checks, and they did cut that down. About 17 million people, 12 million adults and 5 million children won't get partial checks because the phase out is steeper. That was stupid and pointless. The Senate moderates wanted that. But adult dependents now qualify. And so there's actually, I think, 26 million estimated adult dependents will get the $1,400 checks. So that's more than the previous number. And also, they didn't get anything in the previous rounds of checks, the 1,200 and the 600. So there's that in there.
And we should just say quickly, roughly 280 million Americans. You may have just said that, but I'm trying to dissect all of the data here. That's a significant portion. They are going to be getting that check.
Yeah, like 85%.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And then there's a bunch of money for vaccines. Got that rollout, seems to be going quite well. Then there's a big expansion of the child tax credit, which I think this is ideologically the most important thing that's happened. They got rid of the phase out. The child tax credit used to have a phase out in which, in order to claim it on your taxes, you had to earn money. So if you had zero labor income, you wouldn't get anything. And it would phase in, with each new dollar earned, and then phase out once you made a certain amount of money. So it made like a trapezoid shape. Well, they got rid of the left side of the trapezoid, and that's really important because now it goes to the poorest people in the country, assuming they can implement it well. Certainly some people will be left out. We can talk about that. But fundamentally, this reflects a conception of poverty that is totally different from what Democrats have been talking about for the last 40 years, which is to say that poverty is a lack of money, and you solve it by giving people money. And this, all the things taken together should cut the poverty rate by about half. Urban Institute study said it's going to cut the child poverty. Let's see, I think
it was the church. Columbia said the child poverty rate by 1/3, if I recall correctly.
Child poverty rate will fall by a half. The overall poverty rate will fall by about a third.
Oh, so I was wrong. There we go. Thank you for correcting me there.
Urban Institute says 42% poverty rate fall for Black people, non-Hispanic people, 39% for Hispanic people, and 34% for white non-Hispanic people. So a huge fall in poverty.
Yeah.
And so, some of this stuff will expire, the child tax credit, which is just because they couldn't get it through the reconciliation package, but they want to make it permanent. And there's no reason why they shouldn't. It wouldn't be that expensive, only like $100 billion a year. And in that case, it's like they've made what amounts to a child allowance, classic Nordic social democratic style child allowance, and just made it into this jerry-rigged tax credit thing that goes through the IRS. It's like an advanced tax credit.
Because Democrats can't give people payments, they have to make it sound as convoluted as possible and make it into a tax credit.
Yeah, exactly. And the now it's going to be coming in the monthly in the form of direct payments to individuals, just like the stimulus checks. But now, Mitt Romney proposed a child allowance, and I think now there's going to be a real push on just grounds of simple technocratic competence to make it work efficiently, so you don't leave a lot of people out. There are a lot of non-filers among the very poor, people who don't file their taxes. And it may be hard to track those people down. Certainly some of them will be left out. If you did it through the Social Security Administration, much more logical way. But that's
That was
implementation.
Romney's proposal, which even progressives were saying was a more efficient way to do this, and it just kind of it played into the Republicans. Oh, the IRS is good for nothing narrative. That's why Romney went with it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you know, it's not really doesn't have anything to do with taxes per se. You
Yeah.
know, if you're talking about a child allowance, except maybe in terms of how you're going to pay for it or whatever. But uh, you know, from what I've heard from Senate staffers, they were convinced by Matt Brunig's Family Fun Pack argument that you should just have, you know, give the checks out to everyone, and then whatever means test you want to do, and so rich people don't benefit too much, you just do it on the back end with taxes for each, you know, for each year. And so, you know, it's like centrists always talk about how they're, you know, we want to have efficiency. We don't want to have a lot of bureaucratic red tape. Well, what's more bureaucratic than trying to base a monthly benefit on annual characteristics that you don't even know until the end of the year? So, like, you know, I mean, it's metaphysically impossible. But that again is just implementation. Ideologically, we have jumped over the social democratic, you know, hurdle. The answer to poverty is give people money, and like now we're just quibbling over the details of it. And that is very encouraging.
Yeah, so I mean, we covered so much there, and we didn't even get to the other parts of the bill that are key, right? So, well, you mentioned the adult dependents, obviously the continuation of the $300 a month unemployment through September, even though it was cut down again by moderates from $400 in the House version, but the tax credit is so key because we've been talking about this on the show. You were just discussing future implementation of the tax credit, even though that doesn't necessarily have to be the case right after the pandemic is over, I guess. And next fiscal year, they don't need to continue this program in the same way. But I think your sense of it is, and my sense of it is, it's like when you implement Social Security and Medicare or the NHS in the UK. Once these programs are put in place that help people, it's very hard to roll them back. So, I mean, the hardest thing was getting this in the relief package to begin with, these kinds of programs. Can you talk about your view on how this might be sustained past the coronavirus pandemic?
Yeah, you're right. There's a ton of literature on how these type of welfare state programs are sticky. You know, there's a common meme that goes around the left that like the Nordic welfare states have all been like torn up, you know, since the 70s and the neoliberal turn. And you know, the Nordics did get somewhat neoliberalized to varying degrees, particularly Sweden in the form of, you know, giving up all of its state ownership of capital. But the welfare state has been expanded since the 70s in every single Nordic country, and even in the US. You know, it's just a handful of countries that have actually cut overall net welfare spending. And I think once people get, you know, a good handle on these checks, and they'll come to expect them, you know, it'll be a push that, like, you know, why would you stop doing this? It's so helpful to people who need help the most. And that indeed, you know, from people like Michael Bennet and Mitt Romney, to his credit, that is their intention. You know, they are going to try to do this permanently. And, you know, if you can do it once, why would you, you know, I mean, this doesn't really have anything to do with the pandemic per se. I mean, it helps people who are hurt by the pandemic, but, you know, it's just a hole in the welfare state that's been there forever. So why don't you just do it permanently and earn yourself, you know, some votes and, you know, help people who need it? And, you know, the logic of that's very compelling.
I agree. It's just the Republicans are going to fight it tooth and nail. And in the past, as you highlighted in the piece, that kind of why not thinking would not work. I mean, the fear of Republicans punishing them for spending too much was looming over all of these Democrats' heads. And I think you had a great line here. So you said, "I can't believe I'm writing this, but it seems Democrats dot 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 learned from their mistakes." And I can't believe I'm hearing that either, or experiencing this, especially given what you contrasted with the recession and the response to it. So please just touch a little bit more on that contrast too, and just also how this bill. I'll read a few more things that are in it. But there is $50 billion in rental assistance, $30.5 billion for transit agencies, $200 million for Amtrak, $500 million for homeless relief. Not really much money at all for businesses, like we saw in the first package of COVID relief. Can you talk about, one, the contrast and expand on the contrast between what we saw in the response to the recession and then also what we saw in response to the CARES Act as well, or in contrast to the CARES Act too?
Yeah. Before I do that, one thing I wanted to mention, I forgot earlier, $86 billion bailout of like 180 something union pension funds that were about to go bankrupt. And so those have been made solvent for something like 30 years. Sherrod Brown's been pushing for that for a long time. And what this potentially augurs in, I think, is a totally different politics around policy making, as a sort of general matter. I mean, this is almost the worst nightmare of like capitalist ideologues, like your Milton Friedmans and your Friedrich von Hayeks, where even Trump and then the Democrats, at least some Democrats, are basically competing as to who can bribe the citizens the most. This is thought to be like, ruin the economy or whatever, but it also tears up capitalist moral ideology. The moral framework of capitalism is that the working class has to be like beaten into the labor market. This comes from hundreds of years ago, that like in the early capitalism, this real demand for labor. We need to get these peasants off the land. We need to take their land away. We need to force them into the factories at threat of starvation so that they can work in the mills or whatever. And that, you still hear that kind of stuff from a lot of Republicans. Lindsey Graham. I mean, the idea in the CARES Act that you could get $600 on top of your unemployment insurance. So if you're a minimum wage worker and you got laid off, you're making like double or even triple what your income was before. And that was horrifying, disgusting. You could see them like throwing up in the back of their mouths, the idea that people could be paid more not to work. And yet with something like, getting rid of that side of the trapezoid, there's no phase in, all the people get it, even the people who don't work. And so you're getting rid of this disciplining function of the policy structure. I mean, I think that if that keeps up, fingers crossed, not guaranteed, I mean, that could be totally revolutionary in terms of just like the basic structure of American society. It just making things, getting rid of so much horrible, pointless, the bureaucracy that is all designed to horsewhip people into the labor market, all those work requirements and the incredible red tape that anybody has to have to get like, disability benefits and so on. It's like that. Look, if we can do that, if we can do a child tax credit the right way, basically a child allowance, we ought to get rid of all that other stuff too. And just instead of saying, let's beat people into the labor market, we could say, let's coax them into the labor market with good benefits and high wages. That's how the Nordics do it. And they're a greater fraction of their population is employed than here. And it's like, once you've popped that, top of, basically welfare state subsidies, let's bribe the population. I think it will be hard to put that back in the bottle, basically.
Well, I mean, Republican politicians couldn't understand responding to financial incentives and doing what their donors tell them if someone gives them money. They could never possibly understand that. So, I mean, that's a whole different rabbit hole, but I get this like latent feeling of, or I get this feeling of latent racism and bigotry when Nordic states are brought up, because Republicans really just want to say, well, we're not like them, right? We don't have their population, but that's a whole different conversation there. So the other point I want to touch on is how amazing is it that Biden is presiding over this shift? Right? I mean, and it's not like he's doing so really actively, in my view. He just, Sam always likes to say, he likes to place himself at the center of where the Democratic Party orthodoxy is at any given moment in history. But the Democratic Party orthodoxy is here right now. And as you said, they may have learned their lesson. How much is that attributed to, the movements of the past 12 years, but specifically, really, I think the last two presidential runs of Bernie Sanders and the organizing that has been put in place after that? And there's a lot of cynicism and kind of muscle memory trauma among the left. Oh, the Democratic Party isn't responding to us. But in my view, if we're being intellectually honest, this kind of package is not just a response to the failure of the Obama administration to recover the economy in an appropriate time, which was then used against him by Republicans, and then the historic losses of over 1,000 seats during his tenure. Although I think that's a majority of it. I think part of it, too, is there was some penetration of leftist ideology into the orthodoxy. Do you see that Biden has responded to that? And do you see that the Democratic Party as a whole has responded to that in at least some way?
Yeah, I think definitely you don't get this bill without Bernie's two runs. I think that his first run really cracked the confidence of the sort of neoliberal establishment. It showed that Hillary Clinton had this huge glass jaw, and the politics of Clintonite triangulation really didn't have an audience anymore. And then she went down to Trump. And people forget this. Bernie almost had it. He was so close. Even the 538 dorks said that he had a 4 in 5 chance for a couple weeks there, and then everything broke for Biden all at the same time in like one weekend, and that was it. But I think people saw how he caught fire, and how his credibility and his messaging was really turning on the people who the Democrats need. Like the working class, and minority voters, especially young people above all. And I think also, aside from just like sensing political advantage, there has been a ton of, argumentation, ideological moving. I mean, if you remember the austerity frenzy in 2010, I mean, the whole political establishment was just champing at the bit to cut. And that was,
and let me just quickly say, and backed up by the media as well. And now the media is pretty dismissive of Republicans given what Trump has done. I mean, I think that was the service Trump provided, right? Is he got the media to be pretty pissed at Republicans and not giving them deference like they normally did.
Yeah, exactly. And it was maybe also one too many times of doing the deficit trick. It was like Clinton cut the deficit, George Bush gave all the money to rich people. Obama cut the deficit, Trump gave all the money to rich people. And now it's like, the national debt is so high, and yet it's causing no problems whatsoever. The interest rates are at rock bottom. And a lot of people are like, well, why are we bothering with this? And within economics in particular, and the economics discipline is almost unrecognizable compared to how it was in like 2013, 2014 even. There's been a real penetration of kind of lefty thinking on monopolies, on debt and the interest rates, the minimum wage. That the consensus on that is completely flipped in a decade. Used to be economics was totally convinced that a high minimum wage would lose jobs, but people just put study after study after study actually looking at it, and it doesn't. At least in the ranges that people commonly discuss. And now the consensus is, according to like surveys of the profession, no, $15 is fine. and we didn't get that one, but Biden supported it, and he did try to put it in the package. It was just the Senate moderates, Kristen Sinema and Manchin, etc. But yeah, so it's like on a many fronts, politically and ideologically, culturally, in the media, the left has been winning some fairly significant victories, and it's just so surprising that Biden, who was like the worst member of the field, had the most conservative record on anti-integration, on the war on crime and drugs, austerity, credit card companies, bankruptcy reform, so many horrible decisions. And yet here he is, he's just basically a vector of the party, and the party's energy, for the moment at least, is say, yeah, big spending, New Deal stuff, let's bring it back. Roosevelt's good again, baby, Wolf Howl. And we love to see it.
We love to see it, as the kids say. Yes, it feels odd to be kind of speaking in this way about actions done by the Democratic Party now that they're in power, but we're here to call it like we see it. And this is a very good stimulus package, in my view. So Ryan Cooper, national correspondent for The Week, his latest piece, or I'm sorry, you've just wrote a piece called What Does Joe Manchin Really Want? But the piece we discussed today, how Democrats learn to stop worrying and hand out fat stacks of cash. Ryan, where can people learn more about your work and read your work?
Yeah, find me at The Week, or my, Twitter at Ryan L. Cooper, and also I have a podcast called Left Anchor. So more content than you probably would care to actually consume.
Yes, Ryan's one of the best. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.